Okay, so I've been looking at Dynacos on eBay for most of the last year. So I pounced on these about a week ago because I've been looking for, just looking at Mark 3s and stereo centers. I eventually decided I wanted to get a pair of Mark 3s. And I was mostly looking at unrestored amps, like virgin amps that people just got from storage. But this set came up for sale and they had modifications, new capacitors and very good tubes. These are Tongsol KT120s which have come with them, and these are kind of the premium high power tube these days, certainly good for hi-fi, and from what I've read they're very good in Dynacos. And this other box here I guess is the driver tubes and tubes, right? So these are I think 69 22s. I'm not familiar with them. Oh, these have Curcio upgrade driver boards. I'm not sure that I'm saying that name correctly. Curcio, Curcio 6922. And the original driver tubes for Mark 3s were 6AN8A, which I've only heard them being criticized as not being so great sounding. So most people opt to swap them out. But so this Bob Curcios have these updated drive tubes, right? So I've got Mark 3s that have been cleaned up, capacitors replaced, tubes replaced, and circuit boards replaced. So again, those are all mods that I would inevitably want to spend money on. Right, so I'm going to open the Mark 3's boxes here. And the issue with these is that one is assembled, one was refurbished and assembled, and one is still unassembled. It's in kit form, so to speak. So let's have a look, and I will be spending the rest of the weekend assembling the one that needs assembling. And that's cool that one is already built, because then I have a basis to compare, you know, one to the other, make sure I've done my job right in assembling them. Now, for those who don't know, my funny accent is that I'm from Trinidad in the Caribbean or Caribbean, whichever way you say it. And though I bought these from Florida, it took a little while to forward the shipment to me and get them into my hands. So living where I live in the tropics, these amps are rare. Tube amps are rare to begin with, and then tube amps to have survived the climate well, oh, it's just about impossible. So I thought that I would see Dynacos often when I got into working on tubes, but I only got a few when I was very young, and I have never seen any more since. Ooh, this is like Christmas morning. Here we go. Dynaco Mark3. Let's push that off. Long time. This is a real reunion here, folks. I haven't seen one of these in 20 years. And the chassis is in great condition. This looks to be the unassembled one, and I have to take the screws out of here to take this top off, but the top is in good shape and the chassis below is in really good shape, considering that a lot of these things get rusty. They're nickel plated steel. I thought they were chrome, but it turned out that they're nickel, and I think this is in far better than average condition. Just looking at this, I'm just going to remove some of these old school flathead bolts here on the side. There's 4 of them, and I'll lift the cage off. They call it a cage off. You can see there's a whole drill here, and that's not stock, but maybe we'll have a use for it. Okay, so this is the chassis off. These are the the transformers. This one has been replaced, I can see, by the correct Dynaco A431. So this is an appropriate, correct replacement. This is the original power transformer. What's odd about these amps, or what I think is odd about these amps, this is the only amp I know where the output transformer is larger than the power transformer. Usually when you look at these lamination sizes, it's usually the other way around. Usually the power transformer has a bigger stack and also a bigger cross section. Okay, yeah, so this one is loose. There's loose parts in here below. And I'm really not sure which one needs restoring. I think this is the restored one. It's not fully restored. They're both, you know, sort of a kit stage of completion. This has a upgraded power supply board and an upgraded phase inverter driver board, stock choke and switch and fuse holder, octal socket is stock. Actually, this may be wow, this may be a factory wired amp. I don't really know how to tell for sure, but these parts here are all riveted in place. They're not bolted in there, they've got rivets. And that may be that it's a factory wired Mark 3 when it was original. Okay, so here's our second box. I believe that this amp out of the two is less assembled and more in kit form than the first one. Ooh, they are heavy. You don't want to drop that on your foot. Okay, so I can see, just looking straight through, that this has, well, you can see it here. There's several upgraded parts just showing right here. There's an upgraded speaker post, input jack, octal socket. I can see the hole has been drilled differently for the power switch than it was originally. I'm not happy about that. I wish that this amp was a little, didn't have those little extra holes drilled. That would have put them almost in the category of a unrestored amp. Okay, so got those screws out, taking the top off. It seems a bit tight for some reason. Right, so this one I saw in pictures and was told by the seller that these end bells are not original. These are painted in like a hammer tone, like Rust-Oleum. I was thinking that I might repaint these things anyway, but he's done a pretty good job and I like this color. So I'll ask him what color he used here to paint the same color on over on these. Now this one, this grayish, greenish color here, that's the original paint. This is this black is from the replacement one. This is the original color. Kind of thought I might do them over in this original color, but the guy did put in some effort into these and they look good. Okay, so this one is a bit more modified than the other, or at least has some of the newer parts in it. Again, the nickel plating on the chassis looks really nice. Couldn't ask for more as far as nickel condition goes. Let's have a closer look at this board here. These are a board from Mr. Joe Cusio. This is to balance the bias, the current draw on each of the power tubes during the bias procedure with this thing here. This is the bias level and this is the bias balance. This is also an AC balance adjustment, but this one I think you need an oscilloscope set up to balance via the waveform. These take the same tubes, which is the 6922s that I mentioned. These are some upgrade caps. Even these caps have a bit of an expense to them, but I don't like the way they've got this long lead. I think I'm gonna have to trim these leads. Other than that, I see metal oxide, carbon film, carbon and metal film resistors here, all modern types. Everything here is new or relatively modern. They're kind of lined up a little bit crooked, but no problem, I'll straighten everything out. And I'll do a little research into if I should change any of these two metal films. They originally had carbon composition, so anything here is really an upgrade, right? Okay, so I'm going to flip over and let's look on the inside. So here we go. Now you can see this is very much an unassembled kit form, basically. I don't have any problem with that because I could build this stuff, right? You can see they're missing any wires on the octal sockets. These have been upgraded. These are ceramic octal sockets, and they're better at resisting carbon trails if they ever arc. That's the reason we all use ceramics these days. This is an upgrade board, and this replaces this thing here. This is a 4-section capacitor, electrolytic capacitor, and that's what originally came in these amps. You see these 4 little tabs here, that's what they locked into. But the problem is that these amps ran just at about 500 volts on the power tubes, just about. And when you switch the amp on and it's cold, that initial charge, that voltage charge, could go well over 500, probably past 550 or so. And also depends on your line voltage from the power source that you plug into. These were designed back in the day when you had like 115 AC volts in your wall sockets, and nowadays it could be over 120, right, as high as 125. So that creates a certain percentage, whatever, 7% or so increase in all the internal voltages in the amp, and that could send you 500 volts way over the ratings of the capacitor, because the capacitor would be rated for 500 volts. These more modern ones are rated for 525. You can see that there. But this one isn't even in operation. This unit also includes one of these power supply boards. So this is just extra, and I'll be taking this out or just leaving it in place. Or I could take it out and use it in another amp. But this safely replaces that, because what it does is it puts numerous capacitors in series with each other, and you could read in any one there that it's 350 volts DC, and that would be in series with another 350 volt one there somewhere, and that would be 700 volts. So there's a huge margin of safety for these types of modern capacitor upgrades to handle any high voltages that happen during operation. What it also allows, these amps originally have tube rectifiers, and a tube rectifier usually drops some voltage coming into the all of the high voltage DC. And if you use the GZ34, which is the original rectifier tube for these, you drop about 20 volts as compared to if you just use silicon diodes. And by having these with the higher capacitor rating, you can freely use a silicon diode rectifier instead of a tube rectifier, and this will handle those higher voltages. I might do that because I have these KT120 tubes which are going to handle those extra high voltages, and you know, it's a solid state rectifier, silicon diode rectifier, really should produce a tighter sound in bass and transients and so on, and I use that in my guitar amp builds, so I'm very familiar with that choice between silicon and tube rectifiers. Tube rectifiers are more classic sound, but a silicon diode rectifier is a more efficient and tight sound. So this is my fun. I'm going to get to assemble this one and this one too. This is not fully assembled, and I'm going to take my time because I have to do some painting of the transformer and bells and all of this wiring and parts assembly. I'm not really a fan of the two. You can see this replaces this. This is the old screw terminal method, which has 4 connections: ground, 4, 8, and 16 ohms. These things only provide for someone who's chosen what impedance they want to use. So you can see here that they've snipped some wires and they've not put it to a connection. I don't like that. I would like to return this actually to a three or four binding posts. I'm not happy about the 2. Okay, so I'm probably going to swap that back out. I've started properly poking around in these amplifiers. I printed out the manuals for Mark 3s. There's a whole, each type of Dynaco comes with a manual that has a huge checklist and instructions about how to assemble the whole thing step by step. So I have it here so I can go through the checklist to see what's been done and what's not been done yet. Again, this one is mostly assembled. It's missing the power switch and the power cable, but this seems to be mostly intact, and this one is not. What I've been doing for the last couple hours, I've reinstalled the speaker terminals, fuse holder, grounding point, the power tube and rectifier sockets, and I'm now starting to get into more of the transformer connections, rectifier, high voltage, heaters, and so on, right? What I found out, I was having trouble finding out documentation for this, and I realized this is not the power supply board for Mark 3. This is actually a stereo 70 supply board. Now that's good. I'm happy about that because it's small and it fits in here, right? I think the one that's made for these is much bigger, it's more complex, and it fits on the top of the chassis, which I wouldn't want. I wouldn't like that. So I'm actually happy to continue working with these stereo 70 replacement board. And what it does, basically, that whole board basically just replaces this capacitor here, because this is what I mentioned before, frequently has too much of voltage applied to it. It's too near its limit. So I have to go through and get another document printed out or look it up on the phone and just double check all the connections for this. But right now I'm going to do transformer hookups, right? Which are mostly 2-pin power tube pins, and for the primary wiring. Right now I ordered some new very long 10-foot power cables and switches, but those haven't arrived. I wouldn't get those for a while. So I'm going to do everything except the power cable wiring. That'll be the last thing to go in. So I'm just going to set the camera down and do a little bit of soldering. Okay, after a couple of hours, I had like 2 sittings with this before and after my dinner, and I've done most of the wiring. I've done everything at the speaker leads here, the front panel stuff, the bias monitoring lines, input wires there. I figured out the board. I figured out all of the high voltage connections and the different nodes on this board that they go to. And I've decided this board here has a solid state rectifier section. You can see some diodes hanging around there, and I have declined to use it. I've actually bypassed that on this board, and I've wired up the rectifier tube in the regular manner. That means I can use a rectifier tube here when I want to, or just put some silicon diodes across these leads, or make a solid state plug-in module instead of bothering with putting wires back and forth on that board. The section that I haven't dealt with is the primary wiring, which is the power switch and the cord coming in, the fuse and so on. So, and then the final ground wires, right? I've done something of a star ground. All the grounds from the inputs and the power tube cathodes, the power supply, the transformer center tap is coming back to this area here, and they're all going to get connected together here. This one is the amp that I got wired up, not completely, because again this is also missing the power cord, and this is not hooked up properly. What I found with this, funnily enough, I'm not even sure if this seller knew this, but this was wired for triode. If you see this loose wire here, and another one tucked, yeah, here, these 2 wires, These are the wires that make the amp ultralinear, right? So basically, this has been wired up as a triode, and these little resistors here are jumping the screens to the plates on these tubes running in triode mode. There's no switch. Sometimes people put a switch for that, and they're just cut and left alone. So again, this was running in triode mode. I'm not sure if the seller knew that. He didn't say that to me. He may not have known about it. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with it. The wiring is not that neat, but I mean, it's never really supposed to be so neat. This is the original diagram layout. I've kind of followed it as much as I could, but I'm not a popularity contest person when it comes to wiring neatness, right? Anyway, so what the goal is when I get the little parts I'm missing here, I'm going to wire this up, and it's the correct wiring for this board, and the stock rest of the circuitry, and I'm going to get this running. After that, I'm actually going to backtrack and then see what I can improve on this side, right? Because I have to do over this triode ultralinear wiring here, and look for any other little quirks, and maybe shorten and neaten up a few wires as well, right? So that's the update for now, until I get these power cords, and I've ordered some new switches as well. That's it. This is fully wired. Spent a few more hours in these amps, and what I did was backtracking on the first assembled board, and just correcting whatever I thought needed to be corrected, just the way some of the wires were laid out and so on, and just neatening up things, just kind of straightening things. What kind of bothers me, my wiring isn't the neatest. I'm not trying to have the neatest wiring. I'm just trying to get things going, really. But all of the wire colors on the transformers are different, so you kind of see things looking different in this area here. These amps are from different eras, and again, this one has a replaced power transformer, output transformer, so the wires on that are different. But other than that, I have made them identical, so to speak, right? I'm still waiting on my primary section parts, that are the power switch and a cable, a power cable, and the little things to hold them in place. And when I get that, I'll really be finishing it up. But you can see differences. The chokes look a little different. They have the same part numbers, but they do look a little different. That's about it. Some of the wires are just different colors, like you see there and there. These boards, what bothers me with these boards a bit is that the way they're made, the height of this board, it's really kind of almost sticking out above the level of the chassis. And it bothers me and worries me that when the covers go on, some of the high voltage solder tabs are too close to the metal cover that's going to be sitting very close to them. I get concerns that they're going to arc. Now, I've never heard anyone complain about that in Dynacos, but as far as these boards go, it just makes me worry. I'll have to put little strips of insulation between those areas. A couple nights ago, maybe at 3 a.m. in the morning, the time that these thoughts occur, I was going over these schematics, and I realized that earlier I had discovered and realized that this amp, both of them, had been triode connected, not ultralinear mode, which is the whole high power mode. Ultralinear mode on the schematics is when these taps of the output transformer on the primary are connected to the screens, which are always pins 4. Okay, triode mode simply eliminates this connection from the these taps to the output transformer primary, and they connect pins 3 and 4 to each other, right? Very simple. It's usually done with a small resistor. I think a 100 ohm resistor was in place on these, but I think it can be done directly. And these lines here are just abandoned. So it occurred to me in the middle of my sleep that those wires were removed from the overall assembly here, and that I would have to redo those wires. So basically, Okay, so in this amp, there's two negative feedback loops, right? Which are a thing done to clean up the signal earlier in the amp, right? And stabilize the amp. So this is the first feedback loop here. It comes from the transformer secondary, and it goes and it rejoins the circuit here, okay? There's also a second feedback loop, and that is they take a line from one of those ultralinear taps that I just mentioned, and they feed that back into the circuit at the same spot actually, but through this little capacitor. Before on the other end, it's done through these things here, right? So I have to now reestablish this line because that's been abandoned. It's just not there. It's supposed to be from here to pin 4 wherever, sorry, terminal 4, wherever terminal 4 is on these, and that's right here. Okay, if the camera would focus. This blob here has no wire attached to it, and that should be going to pin 4 over here. Okay, and you can illustrate, you see the illustration right here. It would be this wire here. It's missing, and that is this wire here on the schematic, right? Going like that. So I'm just going to put those back in place. Okay, so that's put in, and that's just these blue wires here. Now, you know, at this point, I'm starting to get a little OCD. These amps are not from the same era. There's some differences between them in the lettering on the front and some of the holes that I could see. Maybe they're from different time eras, right? I'm not really sure. And as a result, they've been built and rebuilt a few times at this point, and it is starting to drive me crazy that there's differences in the wiring color codes. You can see differences in wiring from left to right, and even in the newer section that I'm working on, there's differences in wiring color, and it's now starting to bother me. It didn't really bother me before. So probably after I get these working, I'm going to order a set of wires, silicone wires or Teflon wires, and redo everything so that they match, you know, just the OCD in me. Okay, that's it for now. Okay, so I finally got my hands on the last few bits and pieces I wanted to get. These are new, nice long, 10-foot long 3-wire cables with an IEC ends that I'm going to chop off right here. And I got some strain reliefs, and I got a kind of nice modern way to instead of replacing these with the big binding posts like some people do. I don't like that method. These metal posts should fit in between this terminal and a banana plug, right? So hopefully this is my preferred method rather than the binding posts. And then I have a couple of diodes, fuses, and a couple of resistors in here that I'm going to put in this last session, really. I may not finish up in one session, but it's definitely last or second to last. I'm going to show you how I run the 3-wire cord. There's a certain way it's got to be done. The original two-wire cords, well, I don't even know how that works, because you got to get a chassis ground somewhere. And with these amps, I guess it gets it through the preamp or something, but that's dangerous. So I'm doing the 3-wire method. And it's going to run a certain way into the 2 black primary wires here. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's have a closer look at these speaker terminals I mentioned earlier. Nice gold-plated things. There's a banana plug socket right at the end, but there's also a screw-out thing, so you could screw in a bare wire. So I've attached them to the chassis here, kind of put them as neat as I could. To see what's up. So what we would have is we would either be able to banana plug in connections to whichever impedance we want, or you could put in bare wires by loosening these out and squeezing them back into threading. So I think that's convenient, and I'm going to go with that. I prefer to have all my impedances available rather than the 2-terminal binding posts that some people use. Here's one here. Some people swap this in, right? And they got their positive and negative, and they choose which impedance they put on the red, and then they leave the other ones, you know, all taped up inside or whatever. But I don't like that. So I think there's also a 3 binding post version where you can choose which 2, but I like to have all 4 there. So I think this is cool. I like this. Just found these on Amazon, and I think I'm going to go forward with that. Okay, how these are hooked up in simple language. One of these wires, the black one in this color coding, is the live, what we call the live wire, right? Which is your 120 volts. And this would be the ground, and this is what you call the neutral, right? So in this case, what I would do, on the primary of the transformer, there will be 2 black wires for an amp like this, which is a 120 volt input. And it doesn't matter which wire you use, these would be interchangeable. But you choose one, and one will be the neutral, and I've sent it to this blank terminal strip eyelet here. And I'm just going to connect this neutral wire to that one. Okay, so this is going to go and solder in here. The other primary, whichever other primary you choose, will go to this black one, the live one. Now this one gets the fuse and it gets the power switch, right? So that was not how it's done on the original 2-wire setup. Okay, on the original 2-wire setup, 1 wire went to the fuse, the other wire went to the power switch, and then the outputs of those went to these 2 black wires here. But this is different. 3-wire setup, we choose one for the neutral, run straight to the neutral, choose one for the live, and we go through the power switch and the fuse, right? In this case, I'm going to go straight to the power switch, then on to the fuse. Some may argue with that. Some may say that this should go to the fuse first. But for wiring convenience, really, I'm going to send it through the power switch first. Right, so I'm doing that on this, and the same thing here. Again, I'm repeating that these aren't identical matched amps from the same era. They are from different times, so I could see differences in the wire coloring codes and all of that. And you know, this one had a couple of badly drilled holes. Someone drilled a round hole here where it should be a rectangular hole. Someone drilled a random half-inch hole in the back here. I don't know what they did. So I've been trying to think of uses for those holes. Should I put a light or something in there? I don't know. Why not? But you know, I'm just trying to make it look stock on the outside. Inside, I'm not trying to match anything because the color codes are all off. Okay, so let me proceed. Okay, so I've wired up these pieces. There's 2 of them here. Right. All right. So this is the switch. In this case, up is on, right? Anyway, so okay, so this wire, I've doubled it up so that the current ratings of the switch contacts are doubled up, right? So I'm sending the end of this wire onto that terminal of the fuse holder, and then this wire here coming in from the wall, I'm going to put that into these middle contacts here, right? Same way, doubling through. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. Flash is on for the last details. Up is on, so the bottom 2 rows of contacts have the wires. Again, so your live wire comes in from the cable, goes through the power switch, goes on to the fuse holder, and the neutral goes straight and joins the other primary winding. And the ground is in the corner over there onto the little locking tab. It's got a little star washer. Let me show you another one. It looks like this, and it's got a little star washer and a solder tab sticking up, and that you do right as the cord enters the chassis. It's not a ground that's shared with the others. In this case, I do have a star ground on these amps, which is this spot here. You can see all the black wires running off. That goes to all the other grounds of the amp. So I'm actually done. So I'm going to do a little more moving around some of the wires. There's one more ground wire I need to put in. And then I get to look through all my work over again to make sure it's perfect before trying to plug it in and fire it up. And when I do that, I'm into the zone where I test the tubes and so on. On the tube rectifier sockets, there's a well-known mod that puts a couple of diodes in series with the main high voltage line, secondary lines from the transformer. Okay, here you can see these two diodes attached to the socket, and here there are none. If you look at this socket looks a bit crummy. These are going to pins 4 and 6, right, from the high voltage winding of the power transformer. Here we shift those lines across to 5 and 7, and we kind of double back and we put these diodes onto the terminals where these wires were before. So these basically just have these diodes in series with this line effectively, and it's got to do with the flyback effect, preventing a flyback effect on the tube rectifiers, which we know are not the greatest quality these days in the history of tubes, right? And this amp runs pretty high voltage. It's around about 500 volts or maybe just a little less depending on your biasing. And when you first fire the amp up and start it up, as current goes into charge these capacitors, that voltage is a bit higher before they become charged, right? So there's a bit of a spike. Now I intend to run this amp at solid state rectification because I'm using KT 120s, right? And this board, if you see these 4 black little dots there, those are the diodes. This is actually meant to have a solid state diode rectification, but I bypass this on the board and I'm going to use a plug-in module. Basically, by skipping this here, I've left the option on the tube rectifier. So besides these little diodes here, I'm going to make, from an old tube socket, I'm going to make a plug-in solid state rectifier, right? So I could swap between that and the standard GZ34, or also a 5U4 rectifier, which could pull down voltage a bit, but I think I'm going to be running it with the solid state diodes. If I really wanted to do that permanently, I could just do some more soldering here and have diodes do that job right here, or go back to this function here. But by putting it in the little plug-in socket, I'm keeping the option open. Okay, so my wiring kit has finally arrived, and you can see I've gone through mostly these areas to neaten up wires, change the color coding, and just put in all those little 90-degree bends and so on. I just couldn't stand this stuff just crisscrossing and flopping all over the place, and they were all just white wires that came with these kits. Anyway, this area has remained a mess, right? I guess there are always messes on these amps. I mean, and they look different, the wires are different colored. But here I made things as neat as possible. These are the heater wires, tightly braided. These are the bias measurement wires. These red ones are the high voltage to the preamp. And the blue ones here and here are the feedback wires. It's 2 different feedback loops. And of course I've done all my primary wiring here. So I'm actually ready to fire it up. So that's the next thing. Oh, you can see too, I've put on the gold connectors on both. I'm pretty happy with them. Okay, I've fired up the first one. I've connected a 8-ohm speaker load to the back, and I have fired it up. It's on with no rectifier in. What that's going to do is going to show me that the tube heaters are wired up correctly, and that the primary is wired up correctly. Preamp tubes are definitely glowing. I'm not really seeing the light on the KT 120s, but they should be on. I'm just not really seeing it. Oh yeah, I see it now. Okay, so we've got tube heaters working. Okay, I fired it up now. Put in the tube rectifier, and as it heats up, you can see on the meter on the left, you'll see the voltage rising. And at some point, yeah, there we go. Ooh, that's too high. That has to come down. It's coming down on its own as the tubes draw current. I want a measurement of 500 on the right. As that goes up, this goes down. This has to settle around 500. Though right now I have no idea what it would be. Because it heats up, it pulls the current that it wants to pull, and then I have to do the bias adjustment. So right now I need to adjust it downwards. And this is settling still pretty high. It has a tube rectifier in it, which to me is the lower voltage of the options available. If I had the solid state rectifier in it now, that should be higher. That would be about 520 or so. So this needs to be cooled down a little bit. This is measuring one of the tube draws through that socket there. I'm going to switch to the other socket and let's see how far off the other tube is. Not too bad. So I have two adjustments to make on this board. I'll show it here because there's no live current on it. This is to adjust the level, and this will adjust the balance of it. So there's two little things I got to tweak to get this to say about 500 on each tube. But actually being KT120s, which are really high powered, this is probably a fine bias level. But I think I'll go a little low to start things off. So I'm going to adjust it down to about 500. Okay, look at these figures. Okay, so on the left again is the plate voltage right off the rectifier, and on the right is the bias current. And I'm getting just about, I could play with the balance a bit more, but basically putting it into both of those socket spots there, I'm getting very close current. Now this will constantly move around as the amp heats up and so on, right? So every time you measure it, you're going to get a different figure, and they will change. But the idea is to set them relatively close, and really to decide upon the right level it should be at. 50, this would be the right setting for my dog over there. It's just saying hello. For 65, 50s and KT88s, this is the right setting. But the KT120s could go a little further if I want to. But I have no inclination to go higher because because Lily, what's up, baby? Come say hello. Come. Good girl. Now don't touch anything, eh? Okay, thank you. A quick look at the tubes being used. I used the TAD Tube Amp Doctor GZ34s. I had a pair of Mullards, but I'm going to save those for my guitar amps. Again, I was kind of thinking that I would use a solid state rectifier unit here. I didn't expect to use these, but I am happy with this voltage. If I want to go up to about 530 or so, I will swap this, but I don't really think I need to do that. My line voltage may be a bit high. And then we got our Tungsol KT120s, really well regarded. These are two. This is a Sovtex 6922 and an old brand of 6922. This one has two of the Sovtex in the preamp and is identical otherwise. I did read that these amps work well with 6C G7s, and I have a few. I have about 5 or 6 in here to try, but none of them are really matched in any way, so I may not actually use those. I may buy a fresh set of matched 6C G7s for the preamp, or stick with the 6922s. Okay, I've started up the second amp, and as you see before, the high voltage is leaped up. This is the reason you see that voltage there. Mark that voltage in your mind, because most of these amps, when in stock form, don't have capacitors rated that high. They're usually 500 volts or even 525 volts aftermarket, or maybe even 550 volts aftermarket. But you can see on startup, the voltage goes higher than that. So that could pop or prematurely wear your high voltage capacitors, and as that goes up, this goes down. So I'm keeping my eye on this. This has to go to 500, just like the last amp, but it looks to be a little on the quiet side. But yeah, the balance is way off. So my level and balance needs to be adjusted, just like the last amp. I'm just going to wait for it to settle a bit, because it's settling on the low side, and I get to bring it up from there. You see, this is the higher adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to work on that now. The truth is, I put in the tube rectifiers, and I made quite a fuss about leaving the options open between tube rectifier and solid state rectifier, right? But the truth is, I think that when I bias it up, I realize that I'm kind of horsing around and messing up the whole thing. These boards, these aftermarket Joe Curcio boards, they really are meant for solid state diodes, and all of their operating voltages are based on that. Okay, so me leaving the option open, I think I'm actually kind of holding the amp back, because I've got the KT120s, voltage is up at about 510 when I bias them, and if I put in the diodes it's going to go even higher, probably 530. But the thing is that you know, that's a lot of current I'm running through those GZ34s, and I'm not really a believer in needing tube rectifier. And also that in Dynacos like ST70s and Mark 3s, there's a lot of current running through those things, and me personally, I don't really believe that that's the best choice to have in these amps. I'm going to go ahead and, instead of wiring the internal diode setup that they had there, I'm going to take some old tubes, some old 6CA7s, which have all of the pins on the bottom here, and I'm going to take these off the bottle, and I'm going to make these into plug-in solid state rectifiers. Of course you could just buy tube bases and have these, make these from that, but I don't have that hanging around here, and I have a bunch of old dead tubes that I could sacrifice the bases, right? So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to show you how. Well, I'm not really going to show you how I did that because it was pretty dangerous, right? But anyway, so you get these sockets from wherever you're going to get it from, and then we go and we put the diodes inside here. All we have to do is junction. We're taking a diode, a string of diodes from pin 4 over to 8 and pin 6 over to 8. We've marked them off with the silver tabs here in each one, right? And that follows the schematic. You can see we're going from 4 to 8 and then 6 to 8, right? And that's exactly what's labeled off inside here. Little ends of the leads are sticking out here. On the inside, you see there's a pair of them on each side. Okay, so I've stuck a little rectifier unit in here, and I'm going to leave it open while we're doing the testing of it. And this is the other one over here, still open, but I've got some bottle caps that are going to fit right in there with some super glue when I'm done, right? So it's going to be all sealed up nice. But I've got to test them in here. Then let's see what's up with this solid state rectification. Okay, so what happens is when we move from tube rectification to solid state rectification, what we lose is the soft startup of the tube rectifier heating up before it starts to conduct. So when we switch it on, we pretty much slam into the first capacitor and onto the high voltage of the tubes, full voltage, even before the tube is hot. So let's kind of see how it behaves. Let's watch that meter on the left and see how much oh wow, we just went straight. Wow, that's high, 574. Okay, so as the left side rises with the tubes heating up, the voltage on the left is going to go down. And again, I'm pointing out that that is really high. You could imagine that 560 volts hitting your capacitors that were originally rated at 500 volts. The capacitor bank setup on this is rated for about 600 volts, I think. And even that is it's almost pushed to its upper edges, right? Okay, so our bias is going up. I set it to about 55 on the last setup with the tube rectifier in place, and again that was settled to about 510 with the tube rectifier. So exactly as I predicted, it went up by about 20 volts, right? So the bias has gone a little high now because, well, you know, as I said, things keep changing all the time every time I switch these amps on. But I'm going to bring that bias back down to about 55. Okay, so that's it. I've tested both, checked all the voltages. They're both up and running on the solid state rectifier, for which I made these little modules, and they worked fine. Bias was a little high. I couldn't really bring them lower than about 58 milliamps on each tube, but I think that's fine for these tubes. I couldn't do much with this bias circuit to get it lower, so I would have to do something drastic if I wanted to get any lower, and I'm not going to bother. Okay, so I'm going to put the bottom plates and top cages on now. And there we go, I'm all done. I'm going to take them into my room, hook them up to my speakers. For now I have a pair of Acoustic Energy AE1s, hoping for something a little more efficient as time goes by. I need a logo for here. Kind of had a hard time doing an international order on parts for these things, so I don't have a logo yet. Okay, so in this messy room I'm now moving into, this is the setup I've arrived at. Here we have the Mark 3s over here. As time goes by, I'll put them up on the shelf here somewhere. This room is just a mess right now. I realized I have some local recordings that I could play without fear of YouTube blocking my video, right? So the speakers I have are Acoustic Energy AE1s. I'm not sure what year these are from, but they're the original runs, they're not the reissues, and they have the original cast iron stands. Very generously given to me by an aunt, can you believe? Right, have some good vinyl slowly being collected here, bought and borrowed. And we have the old school 90s, 80s kind of chipboard wood veneer glass front cabinet. You know, you had one of these in the 80s or 90s. And why I got this from a friend just the other day was because it had this nice swing out CD cabinet on the side. So I had a CD collection that's just about fits in there. That's pretty great, right? So the stuff I have a Technics SL23, which I've read very good things about, given to me by friends many years ago, and I fixed it up with a new belt and capacitors and so on, and done all the necessary adjustments, and it sounds really great. Here's another kind of cheap model, Technics. I think it's a SLD1, and I picked this up locally on Facebook for pretty cheap. It's missing the cover and a couple of the little bits and pieces. Quite frankly, this one sounds better. This has a kind of chipboard MDF plinth. This is a plastic plinth. I heard it's better if you fill it up with clay or stuff, something inside to dampen the plinth resonances, but I haven't gotten to that point yet, so I mostly use the upper one. This is a very cheap pile switching preamp, but I like it. It sounds good, and it's got some Bluetooth on radio, so I've been using that to switch between all the different sources, and I can do Bluetooth and radio and SD card, memory card for MP3s and stuff. So I like this so far. Sony 3-head cassette deck, 2 Harman Kardon CD players, a single one and a 5 CD tray. Guess which one sounds better? The single one sounds better. And this is the amp I was using before the Dynacos. I was using this as a studio monitor reference amp, Alice's RA100, which sounds really good. But I mean, I really just wanted to get back into the tube thing and build back an all tube circuit. So I might actually replace this with a tube project that I will build by hand. But that's kind of in the undetermined future, right? So right now I've left this in place, and right now I have it running to these 2 subs. These are some Harman Kardon subs. They're kind of cheap, more like home theater small subs, but they're gently helping out the lower end of the Acoustic Energies, which are very bass shy. There's not going to get a lot of bass out of these, so they need a little help in the bottom, right? And that's about it for now. I just kind of balance the volume between this and the Dynacos. This has its own volume, so these are set at about half, and that gives me just about the right sub level. And I'm pretty happy. Everything sounds really good, and a good match between my new old Dynaco Mark 3s and these rather inefficient acoustic energies. As time goes by, I'll collect more speakers and try different things. I have some Yamahas here. These are from a couple of years ago, Yamaha NS45s, which I don't think these were sold all over the world. Two 6 or 7 inch woofers and a tweeter. I don't like these because they've got a kind of blurry mid-range and they're a bit heavy on the lower mids, right? So the vocal qualities of the listening is affected. So I mean, these speakers looked nice when I bought them and everything, but not too clear in the mid-range, which these are excellent at. I'm just getting perfect human voice quality out of these things. That's the completion of the project, and I'm gonna just go back to enjoying this.